To talk about his life as an undercover spy within Al-Qaeda, we welcome from Cork Island, Aimen Dean. Aimen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yours is a fascinating story. I've read the book. 9 Lives is a very appropriate title for that book. So you were a spy for British intelligence inside Al-Qaeda, but it didn't start out that way. Initially, you were a supporter of Al-Qaeda. You joined that terrorist group and became one of its key members. Tell us how you first became involved with Al-Qaeda.
Well, the journey really started in 1994 when I went to Bosnia. I was only 16 at that time. And when I went to Bosnia, it wasn't with the intention of joining a terrorist organization. I went there basically to volunteer with the Mujahideen Brigade, which were fighting in order to help the Bosnians fend off an ethnic cleansing campaign by the Serbs. However, I wasn't prepared for the fact that the Mujahideen Brigade in Bosnia were run, in fact, by Jama'ah Islamiyah, Egyptian, Mujahideen, basically, who were responsible just in 1981 for the killing of Sadat, President Sadat, because of the peace process he started with Israel. So, I went with one intention, but of course, basically, my time with the Mujahideen Brigade took on a life of its own. And I found myself later with the advice of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who came to Bosnia. Of course, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the architect of 9/11. He advised me to go to Afghanistan for training, and so I did. There, of course, Osama bin Laden returned from Sudan, started to re-establish the camps again. And of course, when you are in that environment, it's not going to be easy to resist the ideological and theological appeal of Al-Qaeda. And so I joined them in September of 1997.
Now, Aimen, we often hear about young Muslims, particularly young Muslim men, becoming radicalized, taking up arms against Western countries. Did you go through that process? Because you have described yourself as a young man, as a child really, as a bookish nerd. When did that change take place?
Well, to this day, I'm still actually a bookish nerd. Nothing changed. I think what happened at that time is that the Al-Qaeda started to preach a different kind of jihad. They were saying that we were running, to fight conflicts on the fringes of the Muslim world. Afghanistan, Bosnia, Chechnya, Kashmir. So what Osama bin Laden and many others who were in his inner circle were telling us that instead of running from one fringe conflict to another, we are supposed to actually fight in the center of the Muslim world, because the center is weak, and that is why the fringes are weak. And the only way we can strengthen the center is by expelling the US and its influence out of the Middle East and Muslim world altogether, and replace whatever governments and nation states that are there with a caliphate, a pan-Islamic empire, if you can call it this way. And that is what really changed. So for me, I thought basically we would be fighting against American forces in their bases in the Middle East. It didn't occur to me that it's going to be something more sinister.
Does Al-Qaeda have an active recruitment process? How does that work?
In the 1990s and during the Iraq War, the recruitment used to be really person to person, peer to peer. And imagine basically as an individual, I have a fishing rod and I will go and I will try to catch 1 or 5 or 10 fish at a time. We didn't have the internet at the time, but then with the net came the ability later basically to be able to speak to 100,000 people just with one tweet or one video shared through social media. So at that time the recruitment was on a much slower pace, and that's why by the eve of 9/11 the total members of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan did not exceed 500 people. That's it. We were only 500 people. But then from that date, from 9/11 until now, the number of people who committed suicide bombings and missions basically exceed 19,000. So you can imagine basically the exponential growth of jihadists and in terms of followers since 9/11, because of 9/11 attacks and also because of the internet.
Now, you subsequently went to Afghanistan. You met the al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden there. What was that like? Take us through that experience.
For many of your viewers, their first time seeing Osama bin Laden was on TV was very different from the way I saw Osama bin Laden for the first time. It was extremely different. The Osama bin Laden that the viewers, were introduced to was Osama bin Laden who was wearing, clean robes, neat turban, and looked, confident and with strong presence. However, the Osama bin Laden I met in August of 1996, he just arrived back from Sudan, lucky to escape with his life. He and his followers looked like refugees. He wasn't wearing like all these neat clothes. He wore a creased robe, and his headscarf was exceptionally creased and looked disheveled and disorganized. But what didn't occur to me at the time is that those bunch of refugees who came from Sudan to Afghanistan, in 5 years, just in the space of 5 years, would change the course of history with the most audacious terror attack in New York and DC.
Now, you had to take an oath, you had to swear allegiance to al-Qaeda. You did that in the presence of bin Laden. What did they ask you to do? What did they ask you to say?
A year after I met him for the first time, when he was, still disorganized and wasn't in command of, a compound of his own even, a year later, everything changed. He was in a compound near the airport in Kandahar, in Tarnak Farms. He looked far more comfortable, more confident. And when I went to see him, after I was inducted into Al-Qaeda by the head of his bodyguard, Hamza al-Ghamdi, he asked me to sit down next to him, and I sat down on the floor, and he reminded me before I swore the oath of allegiance that what does it mean, how serious it is, and and he reminded me of the righteousness of the cause I'm going to join. So the oath of allegiance really is simple. He just extended his hand to me, like to take it in a handshake, and then I will swear the oath of allegiance to him, which is simple. I will, I give you my allegiance to fight alongside you against whoever you fight, and to make peace alongside you, with whoever you make peace with, to obey you during the times of hardship and times of ease, and that God is my witness.
So you swore an oath of allegiance to him, but clearly something changed. You started having misgivings about him, about the organization, about what you were doing. What was the tipping point? What led you to change?
What led me to change, not so much that I changed, but they changed. Many people ask me, what really changed you? And I would say basically they were changing. They were going somewhere else where I can't follow. They decided to embark on a campaign that wasn't going to target American army personnel. Instead, they were targeting civilians, and that really culminated in the Nairobi and Dar es Salaam embassies attacks. 2 US embassies were attacked in early August of '98. The news came that more than 224 civilians in Kenya, who mostly were Kenyans and other African nationalities, including Somalis, were killed. 5,000 were wounded. 150 of them were blinded for life. And I was thinking, these people have nothing to do with the conflict that we had with the US at the time. And the way in which Al-Qaeda explained it showed that they were careless about civilian casualties, that they had no problem with that whatsoever, that for them even they looked down on Africans. Well, a bunch of Africans dying, so what? So this reckless disregard for human lives, for people who had nothing to do with the war that we had, showed that they were willing to go to extreme lengths in order to justify, the way that in their opinion, the ends justify the means. And I thought that this will engulf the entire Muslim world in a conflict that will end in an ugly situation, as we are right now. I just felt that where they're going was just too dark of a territory for me to actually follow. And so, of course, I did not wake up the next day and decided I want to be a spy. I just decided I want to leave. I want to go back to the Gulf, enroll into university, graduate and become a history teacher. Much to the relief of my would-be students, this never happened.
So you left Afghanistan, you made your way to Qatar. That's when you were, where you were introduced to British agents. You became a spy at that point. Tell me, how easy was it to leave Afghanistan? Was there no suspicion on the part of the leaders? You were a senior member of Al-Qaeda, so you knew a lot. They knew that. Did they not suspect that you were leaving?
No, they thought basically I was going for my medical checkup. I remember my plan, it was to tell them once I'm there that, oh, the authorities there basically confiscated my passport, I can't travel, you know, well, see you guys in another life. While I, you know, basically go on with my university education. But of course, fate had, you know, another surprise for me. Through, you know, several interesting days, I ended up basically working for the UK intelligence services. It took considerable amount of persuasion, but also at the same time, you know, deep inside my heart, I knew that, you know, I couldn't have just spent 4 years in the global jihadist movement and just you get out of that, you know, without having to contribute towards its dismantling and demise. So, you know, if I was willing to risk my life for Al-Qaeda,
yeah,
then it would be extremely hypocritical of me if I do not, you know, if I'm not willing to risk something in the fight against them.
Right. So you took that risk. You actually were recruited by the British, the intelligence services in Britain, and they sent you back to Afghanistan to do what?
Indeed, I was sent back to Afghanistan because then this is the time when I had to do several things. The first one basically is to keep tabs on Al-Qaeda's WMD program, weapons of mass destruction, including poisons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons. I was also tasked with, you know, paying even closer attention to the camps, their locations, the people who run them, the people basically who are going in and out, the safe houses in Islamabad and Peshawar, the safe houses in Jalalabad in Afghanistan, the headquarters in Kabul, the headquarters in Kandahar, and the camps themselves basically, whether they were in Khost or in near Jalalabad Dam. So, you know, it was really a comprehensive mandate in order to build a better picture of Al-Qaeda's whereabouts, intentions, strength in terms of numbers, the affiliated groups, the relationship between them and the Taliban, and their, you know, global networks outside. So basically, it's just I was overwhelmed by how much I have to do, but nonetheless, it was a task that I relished, you know, the challenge for.
So you clearly passed on an enormous amount of information to the British, very important information, a treasure trove, if I could describe it that way. At any point while you were passing this information on to the British, did you think about the risks you were taking? Did you feel that your life was threatened?
I was under no illusion that what I was doing was extremely risky. In the 30 months I was going and coming into Afghanistan as a spy, from 1999 until 2001, 5 people who were members of Al-Qaeda were apprehended for being spies. 2 were spying for the Jordanian intelligence services, and 3 were spying for the Egyptian intelligence services. Of course, both countries took a keen interest in Al-Qaeda. And they were, of course, given swift tribunal and after that execution. Of course, I never attended any of the executions. I did not want to picture my head being the one basically hitting the ground after it's been chopped. And so for me, you know, these events told me 2 things. The first one is that even though the people who were caught were older than me and more experienced, but the problem is that the intelligence services who sent them there did not train them well. So I was always grateful to the good training that the British intelligence services gave me. But also at the same time, I felt that truly my first mistake is going to be the last. Therefore, I cannot, under any circumstances, make a mistake. And the British intelligence services were so good that they always told me, no pressure. You go in, if you come out and you have nothing for us, we will not think the less of you. The fact that you came out alive in one piece is in itself a triumph. So do not push yourself, do not make mistakes, do not feel under pressure.